Hey people, today is a huge day for me because I am here with one of the biggest gurus in English for me. He's Drew Badger, one of the trailblazers on YouTube for teaching English. Drew, nice to have you here.
No, it's my pleasure, Rod. Nice to meet you.
The pleasure is mine. My first question for you is, how does it feel to be a trailblazer?
Well, it was a number of things really. There was two kind of practical issues. The first was you mentioned before we got on the call about me coming to Japan to want to learn gardening,
Mm-hmm.
and so the practical issue was how can I remain in the country and still have time to do gardening.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have enjoyed teaching, even being a coach back in playing sports or just helping other people. I remember this is kind of a story I haven't really shared on YouTube, but this is a friend of mine many years ago. She was asking me in, I don't know, the fourth grade, I was 10 years old or however old it was. And she said, I'm having trouble spelling extraordinary. And I was like, oh, it's just extra and ordinary next to each other. And like, she was like, oh, and like, she understood how to spell it from that, idea. And I think for me, it was more like helping people trying to figure out something or solve a problem, whether that's in what I just happen to be doing now, which is helping people learn, because that's a problem. It was a problem for me. So part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because of the gardening thing, even though I'm not actually doing any gardening now. But I really enjoy teaching, and the other part was thinking about the problem for myself and how do I become fluent in a second language. And the more you get into it, the more you realize it's kind of peeling away the layers of all the myth and the misinformation and the kind of ridiculous ways that people learn a second language. Once you remove all that, it actually becomes quite simple to learn a second language. And I like seeing the face of people when they discover something or when they realize they actually can speak or that it's not so difficult to learn. So that's why I do what I do. As far as where I am now and thinking about it from a business perspective, that was also, I could see the goal actually when I began quite clearly, because my goal then and my goal today is still to create a system such that anybody in the world could teach themselves English if they wanted to learn it. So it wouldn't be like you have to wait for a teacher or wait for a native parent or something like that, when we all obviously don't have the opportunities to travel to a different country, especially now with COVID where it's more difficult to travel.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted a system where anybody could use it, and that's where the name English Anyone comes from. So it's about like anyone being able to learn the language.
Interesting. English Anyone was one of the first sources when I started back in 1996 because you were already in the business. And now, how does it feel for you to have Frederick?
So this was something. Have you been using that? Have you tried that with your own kids yet? I don't know
I
how old
did.
they
I
are, but
did. It's awesome.
yep. So Frederick was actually the thing I wanted to build 10 years ago when I
Mm-hmm.
started the YouTube channel. And when I was thinking about, how can I do this? Like people just didn't have smartphones and tablets at that time. So even though I had the idea and wanted to release it then, it was actually something I was just doing in the classroom. And I was thinking about making it as physical wooden blocks. So a thing that you would use in the classroom. But I always came back to the idea of how is it possible for someone to teach themselves so that they don't have to wait. And so a lot of students are always worried about not getting feedback from teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are trying to study by yourself or you don't have a native friend or a teacher to practice with you, then you're worried about how can I hear if I'm sounding correctly? Is someone going to give me some feedback about that? So Frederick began as the flashcards in the classroom when I was teaching, and I was just, okay, how can I make that possible for everybody? But it wasn't really until the technology became available that the system was able to do that. But now, because people have smartphones and tablets, anybody's able to do that, and I can actually kind of transition away from video, which I hadn't intended to do in the beginning. But video was just the next best thing I could use. And again, I really like video as a medium, and it's really great for helping people learn. But the instant feedback that you get from a system like Frederick, using software rather than video, it's a lot more interactive, obviously. But
Hmm.
it's much easier to teach yourself that way than it is from using a video. And also because it's active, it's not something that
Hmm.
you kind of sit and watch a video and you maybe your mind goes, spacey. You start thinking about the laundry or the kids or
I
dinner
agree.
or whatever. So when you have an active system like that, it becomes much easier to learn.
Hmm. Taking from that point, how do you consider someone making a mistake in English when they are communicating? Do you think it's very important that they learn from the mistakes they made? Do you think it's natural from the language? Because I see today with my students in Brazil that they are so afraid to talk to someone else by being afraid of making mistakes. And I think it's so silly. If you mistake a preposition, if you whatever, what's your idea about that?
Well, I think it's a natural thing and it's part of the process no matter what you're doing. So you could be trying to help people with anything. I mean, if
Mhm.
if you want to teach people about gardening, for example, and I want to teach you how to grow some flowers, you're going to have a lot of questions for me because it's just I was actually talking with a friend of mine about this yesterday because he was
Mhm.
asking me why is it that people get so nervous about things like
Yeah.
speaking a second language, something like that. And
Mhm.
it's because of loss aversion. You ever heard that term before?
Mhm.
So it basically, just for anybody out there listening that doesn't know what it is, in general, humans are much more likely to be nervous about losing something than we are excited to gain something. So if I'm going to give you $5, you're a little bit excited about that. But if I'm going to take $5 from you, you're a lot more worried about that.
Yes.
And you can see why that would be if many years ago we're living in jungles or having lions and things like that trying to get us. We make a mistake and that could be very costly for us. So we live in a pretty different world now, a much more
Mhm.
forgiving world,
Yeah.
but we still have the same psychology.
Mhm.
So if you understand that you're going to have that, it's kind of like I'm living in this machine that is going to make mistakes, and I understand that's part of the process. Then it's much easier for me to overcome that. But I think it's also easier if you teach people the right way. And what that means is helping people understand English like a native speaker
Mhm.
rather than trying to help them understand something through
Mhm.
their native language. It becomes it kind of makes it a lot more comfortable for people to communicate so they don't worry about making mistakes.
Awesome. Other teachers that I know on YouTube, they all study a second language. And you
Yeah.
speak Japanese as a
Yeah.
second language as well. Was it too difficult for you to learn Japanese?
Well, it was certainly difficult at the beginning because while I'm discovering how to help people learn English, I'm also learning Japanese. And so
Mhm.
I'm trying to understand it's not just the language, but how to learn the language.
Mhm.
And it works the same way for every language, as I discovered later. But
Mhm.
there were all these assumptions I had about how I should learn. And so most of the things that I was doing in the classroom, and like I know I feel like sometimes I'm being down on teachers or complaining about
Mhm.
teachers when
Mhm.
really it's basically the way that the whole system works and the way most people have to teach
Mhm.
lesson plans that are given to them or textbooks or things like that. So it's not really their fault that people have to teach this way,
Mhm.
but you're trying to basically use your language to learn a second language. And this is how I was learning Japanese.
Mhm.
And when I don't know if you know this story about me going to a park and looking at little kids out there and saying,
I
okay,
remember
why?
that.
So
Mhm.
if I'm I have like a degree in philosophy. I'm not an idiot. I should be able to learn a second language or another
Wow.
language. I
Yeah.
learned to speak
Uh-huh.
English just fine.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, why is it possible that all of these little kids are able to speak better than I do, and they're even 2 years old, 3 years old.
Mhm.
My younger daughter Noelle, so
Mhm.
she just turned two, and I mean she can say sentences and she's saying things that adults would say. And so I'm looking at that and trying to understand how that works, not only
Mhm.
for my own benefit as a learner, but also for the students that I was helping in the classroom.
Mhm.
And it made a lot of sense. Like once you learn the right way and understand that you're not connecting vocabulary in one language with vocabulary in another language. You're connecting the meaning with vocabulary in English. Because young children, they don't have a way of translating. They don't have a second language to learn their first language. And so you don't need to
Sure.
do that either. So it works the same way. And so there was a really long time that you probably heard also that I mean, I struggled for 20 years to learn different languages. So I had to
Mm-hmm.
learn Latin in elementary school. And then I failed. And of course, I failed at doing that. I don't speak Latin at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then French and Spanish in high school and college. And then even when I was in Japan initially, I'd still struggled. I mean, I thought, okay, this is the magic thing, right? You live in the country, and so you start magically speaking the language, and it
Mm-hmm.
actually doesn't work that way. I mean, often it's actually more difficult because you're dropped into a situation where everybody is speaking, and you feel even worse about
Mm-hmm.
not being able to communicate. And so if you don't have, really strong confidence, which honestly I didn't have at the time, I'm living out here and I felt really frustrated and even wanted to go back to America because it was just so difficult for me. But seeing actually taking time to think about how people really learn languages, if you learn them like native speakers do, and I tell this to students, but as a kind of like a business thing, I actually can't say learn like a native because people just think it's impossible to do
Yeah.
that. But once you start doing that, the transition from me kind of struggling to becoming fluent was actually really quick. And another thing, like I try to explain to people that fluency isn't a process that happens over a period of time. Once you learn the right way, fluency is something you develop word by word.
Yeah.
And so you learn to use individual vocabulary like words and phrases fluently. And then as you put more and more of those into your vocabulary, you just have a larger vocabulary that you can use in different situations. So it's not what people think is, okay, I'm going to study and study and study for years, and at some point I become fluent. It doesn't work
Mm-hmm.
that way. So if you're doing all the individual vocabulary or grammar, if you're learning each of these individual pieces and you're understanding them like a native, then you start using them fluently. And with just a little bit of practice, you become very quick at that.
Yeah.
And this is exactly how young children learn a second language. And this is why, even with a limited vocabulary, they can speak better than most non-native English learners. So they don't know as many words, but they use them fluently. And that's because they
Exactly.
understand them like natives, and then they just practice those things again and again until they get really good at using them. So this is why when I'm explaining this to people now, it's not something like you actually can get fluent instantly in something by understanding it the right way. And so this is why I use lots of examples of people doing things and seeing them visually. It's
Mm-hmm.
just to help you understand something directly rather than using translations or studying rules or explanations, that kind of thing.
I agree. And let me tell you something. There's
Mhm.
a video of yours where you explain just and only that you were talking with your mother-in-law, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken, and you said just water,
yeah.
and she asked why not only water. For me, that explanation was genius. How could you come to that explanation so clear to help her understand?
Well, it's if you understand the basics of how the mind works and how
Mm-hmm.
the brain wants to learn, it's really some very simple things like contrast or comparing things. And this is exactly what I've done in Frederick. So I'm taking kind of very basic principles and just applying those to broader situations.
Mm-hmm.
So what you'll often see in typical classes is people kind of teach grammar or vocabulary backwards. So they will begin with some kind of random grouping of things. I'm trying to think of a good example for it, but like in this case of just and only, you notice I'm beginning with a situation and working to the
Yes.
vocabulary.
You give the
So
context. Yes.
yes. So you understand that as a native, and you can see that, if you're in a situation or if I'm trying to write it and you're reading that thing,
Mm-hmm.
but you begin with the situation or the feeling or kind of whatever mood. It's in the same way that a young child would look at their mom when their mom is very angry at them, and they're like, oh, I better. Like my mom is
Mm-hmm.
saying something to me right now, and
Mm-hmm.
I can tell that they're not just using vocabulary like
Yeah.
don't do that. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't really remember that, but when your mom is like, don't do that, what's wrong with you, you're like, oh, you remember that
Yeah.
vocabulary very
Uh-huh.
quickly. And so you're not trying to take time to think about like how the situation would be like after thinking about the vocabulary. You look at the situation and go back to the vocabulary from that. So the example of just and only, I'm explaining to them like, well, here's the situation and we can look at some different examples, and now I'm going to contrast like this thing versus that thing. And so when people kind of teaching in the typical way, they would teach the word just. So they would begin with a word. Now we're going to give you a bunch of different examples with the word just, and then here's how to maybe say that in a conversation. But again, it's backwards from how you would normally learn something in your native language. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, people have this idea of there being a second language when that's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, you, like everybody else, Rod, I mean, you speak multiple languages fluently because you speak one way with your children, one way with, the adults in your life, or if you have a boss, you speak to him or her
Mm-hmm.
differently than other
Yeah.
people. And so each one of these, we're actually using different vocabulary for
Mm-hmm.
these situations. So it's the same thing in Japanese. You've got like more
Yes.
polite speech that you're using for some people, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
speaking to children in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
and these are each different languages, and it's the same thing if you're learning programming or something like that. And the more you can connect directly with that information rather than putting a bunch of steps in between you and the
Mm-hmm.
thing you want to learn,
Yeah.
the more it becomes really clear to you what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Now, I, many years ago, even before me, like I just studied about education because it was interesting for me, but you probably are familiar with Stephen Krashen.
Mm-hmm.
And so he talked about a similar idea, which is basically the only way we learn a language is understanding it like a native. Now, he had the idea of kind of philosophy and then going down to methodology, but I took it to technology with Frederick. So if you can actually get it to that step where
Mm-hmm.
you aren't kind of intellectually understanding or trying to explain to people how something works, then it
Yeah.
becomes much easier. But yeah, from that example, we begin with the situation and then we look at the vocabulary and then we contrast that with other things we might
Mm-hmm.
use in that situation and
Mm-hmm.
make it understandable about why we pick one thing versus another. And you know it works when you're a student and you listen to something, you're like, like I get it.
Yeah, because you have to figure out and link one thing to the other. One last question. I saw another video with you and your dad
Yeah.
where you talked about receiving and having at your house exchange students.
Yeah.
So you received a lot of Brazilians because
Yeah.
your father was a principal at a school, if I'm not mistaken, or something like
Yes, so
that.
he was the assistant, or I think he became the dean, I guess, for international students
Yeah.
at the University of Chicago Law School.
How much do you know about Brazil? I'm curious.
Sure. Well, I mean, not I don't have a lot of I mean, I have actually more experience now with people, not so much about
Uh-huh.
Brazil, but more about Brazilians learning
Yeah.
English.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it when I was younger. So for people who don't know about this, every year for Thanksgiving, people in international countries, they didn't have enough time to fly back home, and most of the people at the university are away. So all the people, from the United States that are living locally, they would travel back
Mm-hmm.
home, but the international students didn't really have anywhere to go. So
Yeah.
my family and another family, they were kind of hosting a Thanksgiving party. So that's the only Thanksgiving I knew. I didn't usually have the typical thing where you're sitting with
Yeah.
your family or your extended
Mhm,
family
mhm,
and having lunch or dinner or whatever. And so we had, people from Brazil and
mhm.
China and people all over the place.
Yeah,
And so it was interesting, just seeing the different people and how they behaved a little bit differently. But I noticed the Brazilians were like more fun, even
yeah,
as just kind of like a livelier, it's like, oh, these are like a tropical people. Like this is
yeah,
very cool,
yeah.
So it just
We
different.
we are very warm people. I can
Yeah. Yeah.
assure you that. So, to finish, I have a little game, the rapid round. Okay.
Okay.
So, my family is
My family is important to me.
living in Japan,
Living in Japan, it's home.
being a trailblazer on YouTube,
I think I expected that from the beginning.
drew the Fluency guide.
Yeah, you should use him to learn English.
My biggest dream is
To help everybody on the planet who wants to learn English to learn.
Good, very good. Now I am on the hot seat and you can ask me questions.
So why are you interviewing people?
And because I want to motivate more Brazilians to know that it's possible. And also, not only Brazilians, people around the world, because I have people who watch me from all over the globe, that it's never late to learn English or any language that you want to learn, you know?
Indeed, indeed. What's the most difficult thing you've heard from students, or the biggest problem you've heard from students?
In Brazil, actually, I can tell you they are very close to teachers. So they share a lot of personal stories, and we end up becoming their friends. So there's a lot of personal stories that I consider hard. Like I had a student once that he came to me, he was 13 or 14 at a time, and he told me, "Teacher, we had a party at home this weekend." I said, "Yeah, what you were celebrating?" Said, "We weren't celebrating anything. My father just bought some pizza." For him to have a party with that pizza, for me, was something that I keep till today. I like telling stories and listening to stories. That's why I'm interviewing people as well, you know.
Oh, that's great. So who else would you like to interview that you haven't already?
To tell you the truth, I am a big fan of yours. Just looking at you and listening to you, being so kind to me, it's priceless.
Well, I'm happy to help, but your journey must not be finished.
And also, one thing that I want to bring to YouTube is my life story. Because as I told you before, being a disabled person and living in Brazil, because people don't really understand what that is, and I live in an interstate town, there's only 20,000 people in my city. I speak from the heart, if you know what I mean. There's nothing that I do that is calculated, or I am really happy because you were the first one who I watched every day to get better. You didn't even have courses. I watched your videos on YouTube and you started with those ones just with pronunciation, what we call now podcasts, you know? So
Yep, yep.
that's really good. That's why. And I want to keep doing this. As long as people want to listen to me, I'm going to be here.
What are your plans for the future? You're hoping to do what by telling your stories and
Yeah.
releasing these videos?
First of all, I want to see my family happy and my children healthy as everybody else. I want to keep teaching English. My channel, I just started. It's 4 months that I am working with the channel. I'm really enjoying the ride, but I live in the forgotten corners of the world. So I'll try my best. Never in a million years I thought you would accept to have an interview with me, you know? So
Oh, why not?
because you don't even know me. When you said, "I'm glad to help," I said, "Wow." And today, my dream is coming true. I'm just
No,
telling
it's
the truth.
I appreciate that, and I think we all have situations where we meet someone we're like, wow. But I
Yeah.
think the only reason I encourage people to kind of tamp that down
Mhm.
is because it helps you improve your fluency if you can do that. Because
Yeah.
lots of students in the same way are, they're like, oh, I get to speak with a native speaker about something, and that's a
Mhm.
really, and they get even more nervous, and it makes it more difficult. But if
Mhm.
you don't put people on a higher level, you're just saying, oh, like obviously
Mhm.
there's something I can
Yeah.
benefit from this person or get something like that. But
Mhm.
I'm here to learn from them and share
Yeah.
things with them, and maybe even teach them something at the same time.
I
Uh,
wear my heart on my sleeve all
yeah,
the
yeah.
time.
No,
Maybe.
you have a good heart. It seems. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'll ask you one last question
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to Madonna if you could meet her?
I think I couldn't enunciate any sentence if I met her. You know,
Yeah.
like, "Hi, I'm Madonna." You know, I think I wouldn't say a word. The sentence never meet your heroes. I don't know what you think because
Ah,
sometimes they can let you down, you know. So
that's true. Oh no, then we shouldn't be on this call.
because yeah, because no, because I went to school to learn English because of her. And
Sure.
maybe if I meet her one day and she's not in a good mood, maybe it may destroy what I feel, but I don't think so. But I think I'll never meet her, So
Mhm,
my wife
mhm.
says I'm not jealous of Madonna because I know that you're never gonna meet her. So
How
Eh,
did you meet your wife?
we lived in the same town
Hmm.
and we met each other at a snack bar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. And we are together ever since with two boys, a
How old are
teenager.
they? Oh, they're
One,
teenagers.
one is 13 and the other is gonna be 4.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right.
Yeah.
All right.
They're all funny. They're very smart, intelligent, and I want them to be good people because this is the only heritage I'm leaving to them when I'm not
Hmm.
here anymore. I have something to say to you.
Hmm.
To finish, I have a sentence or a quote to everybody, but for you, it's going to be something special. I want to thank you. Because of you, my English got better. In the late 90s, when I was still studying English, and I wasn't even thinking of becoming a teacher. Thank you very much. I think never in a million years you thought that you would meet somebody in Brazil who literally watched your videos with a strong admiration, and you were the first one of the pioneers. Thank you very much for helping me in this journey. You
No,
are
it's
very
great.
important.
No, I'm very happy about that. And it's a thing, I actually I enjoy situations, especially when I can meet people personally here in Japan. People even who don't know what I am. Sometimes people see me on the street or whatever. They're like, "Hey, it's you,"
Yeah.
It's pretty rare, but it's more about just getting to interact with people because I don't when I'm teaching a million people
Hmm.
online, it's not the same thing and you don't get the same kind of feedback
Hmm.
as a teacher from people individually. So it's always great to hear that people
Yeah.
are improving with my material and
Yeah.
they're changing their lives and things
Yeah.
like that. It's great to hear.
But for me, you did a lot. Thank you very much because you cleared my mind many times with a lot of questions that I had about the English language. This interview is going to be very educational for everybody. All the others are, but this one is, we went much deeper because you explained everything very clearly. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This is one of my first gurus in the English language. He laughs, but for me, it was a lot. He was very important piece for me to learn English today, for being the Brazilian English teacher that I am today. So thank you all for watching. Drew, thank you for accepting my invitation. It was a pleasure to talk to you. See you next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.